Let me tell you a little story. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was invited by a man who, I can't say too much about this, I want to be very careful. He's a tycoon. Big successes in a country that I shall leave unnamed. And the first time I met him at a conference, he told me he couldn't stand Christians and didn't much care for Christianity either. I said, "Why are you here?" He said, My wife asked me to give her 1 week, and I guess you're the speaker, so you better be good," he said. I said, "Look, you didn't promise me anything, but you promised your wife that you would come and enjoy this week. If you don't like the messages, that's okay. But give your wife and your boys a good week. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you've honored her with her request to give her 1 week of your life. And if you don't like what's going on when I'm speaking, you get up and walk out. You won't offend me. That happens quite often in audiences, and I'm quite comfortable with it. You won't be bothering me. You can get up and leave comfortably. I'll be okay about it. But give your wife what you pledged her this week." He came the first week, his hands like this. Second day, he drops his hands. Third day, he's listening carefully. On the fourth day, his son comes forward and says to me, "Can I talk to you?" He's 18 years old. Long story. He asked, "How can I become a Christian?" The son's life was transformed. Father looks at me later and says, "What happened to my son?" I said, "Did he tell you what's happened?" He said, "Yes, he says become a Christian." I said, "What do you think?" He said, "He looks different." I said, "That's only the beginning. A lot more different is going to happen." On the last day, he sat down on an island with my wife and friend and his family, looked at me and he said, "I like you." He said, "I like what I'm hearing." He said, "I am going to help you in a significant way, but I want you to make one commitment to me. I want you to fly into my country and I want you to meet our leaders. What you have preached is what my nation needs." So, 3 weeks ago, he asked my wife and me to join him on a cruise. Don't be misled. It was a beautiful cruise. But I went to work. He decided to bring people on that cruise, about 8 or 9 of us, and he chartered this whole yacht along the coast of Sicily and so on, and I was to answer their questions. So I worked. 3 days into it, this man sits down, one of the men he brought sits down next to me. He's 50 years old. And he said to me, "Let me tell you my story. My life's a mess. My marriage is broken. Nothing has gone right. I'm a very wealthy man. I don't need any more money, but my life is shattered. Everything is wrong." He said, "In fact," he said, "about a short while ago," he said, "I called my former wife and I sat down with her. I said, our lives are a mess. Children are suffering. Why don't we put it back together? I'll forgive you for what you've done. You walked away on your word. You walked away on your commitment. You picked up this other relationship. I'll forgive you. And I won't ask any more questions, but let's just join hands together. Let's come back together. Just turn your back upon that and come back and we'll have you back as a family." He says, "She stunned me by saying I need 6 months to think it over." He said, "I gave her the 6 months. After 6 months we met, she said, give me 3 months more. And after we met 3 months later, she said, I don't like you laying down all these stipulations for me. I'm just not comfortable with the way you lay all these ground rules for me," and so on. He said, "So Ravi, that's where I'm at." Then he began to talk about his journey in life and so on. And finally I said, "Let me stop you and ask you a question. What have you got against Jesus Christ?" He said, "Well, for one thing, I don't like this conditional love of his. All these conditions he lays, if we don't abide by him, he's going to toss us into an eternal hell." And he went on and on. I said, "You know what? I find it fascinating. You begin your story by telling me you want your wife to come back, and you lay some conditions for her on which she is to come back. And now you're telling me the thing you don't like about God is that he lays some conditions for you." I promise you, here's what happened. We were sitting on a sofa. He was on my left. I'm looking at him this way. He stares and stares at me, gets off that sofa, on his knees. He covers his face and he sobs like a little boy with drawn out, long heaves and sobs. I just didn't know what to do at the moment. He sobbed and sobbed. I had the privilege of getting down next to him, putting my arm around him, and praying with him as he gave his life to Jesus Christ. That night, in a tiny little island in Sicily, at the end of the dinner, he stands up and tells everybody, "Can I say something to you? Today, the 20th of June, is my real birthday. I have found Jesus Christ, and I am a new person today." The man who invited him is the man I mentioned I met before. And he just looked at him and he said, "Now you're going to make me start crying." And his 3 sons said to me that night, "I've never seen my father cry before." There's a law of God. There are parameters. There are boundaries. You want to enjoy life? You honor his law. You do it his way. You want to destroy your life? You violate the laws of God. If there's any young people sitting in the audience, let me tell you something. The world out there will try to provoke you to live in a total violation of God's law. And you live that way and you'll be on the path to self-destruction. You do it God's way, you live a life of perpetual novelty.